In the name of one God, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. Amen. Well, we have a 4th of July holiday this weekend. We still have a virus and a pandemic lurking, and we have the gospel lesson for the day. So I figure that gives me 3 sermons that I can preach either all together or one after the other. But I'll try and pick just one for you this morning. I remember a previous parish I served. Some of you may be listening or watching from that area, parish up in New England in the Northeast. It was a location that was well known as a summertime paradise and tourist destination. And in July and August, the town swelled with a whole lot of extra people and extra festivities and extra parties and beachgoers, and that summertime literally made the front of countless postcards that were sent from there all over the world. When September came, the town would shrink again. By Halloween, the kids needed overcoats, and after Christmas, things could get a little grim. The Christmas celebrations could be another kind of Christmas card with lights and snow and that sort of thing, but there weren't too many Christmas cards from that locale in February. That time after Christmas, what we used to call in the school that I went to, the Dark Ages. January and February could be a little rough. And the folks who were there year-round would hunker down in good New England fashion, usually not complain too much, would just grit their teeth and try and make it through. The first year I was there, I thought perhaps it was just me getting adjusted to the weather, but after a few years there, I realized that those months in January and February and March as well, anyone who began the Dark Ages, my phrase, no one else's, anyone who began that after Christmas time when it was not just cold but dark, the sun would disappear behind the clouds for weeks at the time, unlike, say, Colorado, where you can have snow but bright sunshine. Anyone who started that time after Christmas already down for any reason was in for a rough ride. And our Sunday liturgy still followed the Book of Common Prayer. We still had Eucharist. We still had beautiful music. Still could have fellowship, but behind the scenes, there were lots of extra conversations, extra checks on people, especially those who were shut in at home. Also those sometimes who were shut in at home due to illness, or if the snow was too deep, almost everyone was shut in at home for a while. But those could be tough months. And any normal stress and strain would just be magnified, and many times behind the scenes, it was just a rough time for many people and many families. In public, everyone tried to keep their best face on. But yes, behind the scenes, there were lots of extra moments of care or concern or even risk or fear. I say that not to pick on New Englanders, they're a hardy bunch. But even though the weather is much different in the Texas summertime, the sun is out, We're not dealing with mounds of snow or ice or freezing temperatures. We're not shut in because the roads are impassable. But these are difficult times that, like the dark ages in New England winter, now have stretched for months. As some of you know, if you've been reading the emails I've sent, we already had a plan B and then a plan C for some sort of modified worship on site here in suburban Dallas. And yes, as many of you know, whether you're here locally or watching from other places around the country or around the world, the virus has made quite a comeback. So we're still doing it this way for a while longer. But even though the roads are passable and the sun is shining, we now are outwardly in very different circumstances, but behind the scenes, maybe in a little bit similar situation as to New England winter. In the dozens of conversations I have every week with our members, both our current members and even former members who have moved away and kept in touch, the strain is starting to show. Whoever may be in your household, if you're by yourself, the isolation's getting old. If you're with others of any age, let's just say that patience is wearing a little thin in almost every household. Some are still working high-risk jobs, and I'm not going to get into the different interpretations of data or policy or politics. It's not my place, especially on Sunday morning. Suffice it to say that we all are trying, I do believe, to somehow avoid the two extremes. One extreme of living in fear of every single step, and the other extreme of just living in denial and pretending like none of this is happening. But it's the first time, at least in 13 years in Texas, that I felt the same feelings and emotions from the parish as a whole. And it's not just apostles, I think it's everyone. So if you're tuning in to us from a remote area in Idaho or somewhere else, again, no offense to Idaho, if you're in a remote area with no virus cases at all, wondering what the big deal is about, then consider yourself fortunate. But we're still a little bit on edge here, and that on edge is seen in public, and it's felt very much in private, in our own emotions and decisions, and in our own many households. The frustration is real, and I know of no one who is extraordinarily happy about it, not in the least. But we are reminded this morning that our job in the church is not to always be made happy. Our job in the church is to be made holy. I'm not trying to minimize how we feel about a pandemic, or for that matter, even about politics or civil unrest or the many challenges confronting our nation. Yes, that's another sermon for another day. But to acknowledge the deep frustration, anxiety, resentment, unhappiness that we have, I'd say in the pews, but among us all, and to realize at the same time that happiness is not the short-term Christian goal. Yes, eventually we look forward to that time where we are happy and joyful with Jesus forever. I know that sounds like a cliche if you just happen to be tuning in for the first time, but that is still the ultimate Christian desire. To be with Jesus, to be in heaven praising God forever in that place where there is no sorrow or sadness or disease or death or pain, but life everlasting, to borrow from the funeral service. It's okay not to be happy about everything right now. As Christians, especially as mature Christians, it's not okay to stop trying to be holy. And that can be a tough order when we are sitting and not liking what we're seeing and what we're hearing and what we're living in. But the country and the church both have been through this before. Not to minimize it or to minimize how you or I may feel about it on any given day. But it's not the first 4th of July or the first Eucharistic liturgy that the country or the church has celebrated, quite literally, to celebrate Eucharist and to celebrate the good news of the gospel when the outward circumstances don't seem to give us much cause for celebration. I was reminded earlier today from a family member that I had a grandfather whom I never met. He died before I was born, who was born 127 years ago today. Yes, if you do the math, that means his birth year started with 18. Whether we were talking the year 2020 or the year 1893 or the year 483 for the church, there have been relatively few golden ages of peace, prosperity, harmony, without war, disease, death, or political turmoil of some kind. That doesn't mean we don't engage the world. It doesn't mean we don't have strong opinions. It doesn't mean that we can't advocate and fight for various and sundry causes, whichever ones may be your favorite. It doesn't mean that we do not seek the happiness of all citizens or members here and elsewhere. But we are called to be holy and to become holy, or I should say, accept God's holiness working within us, even and especially in those times where we may not be happy about our circumstances, or the nation, or the world, or our political leaders, or our options. Some of you may know the ending of this particular gospel lesson this morning. Yes, I'm going to get around to the gospel, I promise. Those of you who know the Anglican liturgy of the prayer book, whether it's the one we currently use or the one that was from the 1920s, you may know that this particular passage, "Come to me all you who are weary and are carrying heavy burdens, I will give you rest." Some of you may know the older version based on the King James and the older prayer book. After the confession of sin and the words of absolution and forgiveness, there are words in the older version of our liturgy still found in the prayer book known as the comfortable words, literally words of comfort. And these words are part of them. In the older English translation, though, some of you may know it, you may have heard it almost every Sunday after confession and words of absolution, the celebrant can say, "Come unto me, all you that travail and are heavy laden, and I will refresh you." That particular translation may carry a little bit more meaning, not just because the words are older. In some ways, they make more sense. Come to me, all you that are weary and are carrying heavy burdens, is not a bad start. But we can be weary from being at the gym for 30 minutes. We can be weary because we stayed up late last night. But come unto me, all you that travail and are heavy laden. Some of you may know that the word isn't used very often anymore, but travail actually doesn't just mean mildly tired. It means exhausted to the point of suffering. It's the same word that we often use for women in childbirth. I think some of you don't need me to say much more when I use that comparison. I've said and heard it said recently that right now, with what's going on with our pandemic, it's sort of like turning to a woman who is 8.5 months pregnant after a long, difficult, exhausting pregnancy and saying, oh, by the way, this is no longer 9 months, it's going to be 18. You'll be fine. Yes, this has been a long road for many of us. We have been mildly or significantly inconvenienced, but some have been ill. Many have been lost. Thank God, none here among us inside these four walls. Not yet, and let's keep it that way. But we are all tired of it. We are frustrated. We are not happy, but we are still called to allow God to make us holy. Back to the image in the gospel, very briefly. When I was a boy, I heard this and I couldn't figure out why Jesus was talking about eggs, and maybe he was talking about eggs over easy. My yoke is easy. And then, of course, when I got older, I realized Jesus was talking about a yoke, Y-O-K-E, not a yolk, egg yolk, Y-O-K. The yoke, of course, we don't see it very often in our day, in our location, but that is the piece of wood that goes over top of the oxen as they are in effect in the harness and working and pulling. The idea is that Jesus is alongside us and helps bear our burdens. And yes, give us rest and peace and refreshment and encouragement and strength, even while we are shouldering our various and sundry burdens, individually, privately, and together as a community, a parish, and a nation. It is a reminder this morning that as much as we may be unhappy with our particular burdens, the ones that are public and known to all of us, or the many stressful ones among our households in this parish now that may perhaps remain private and discreet, often for good reason. We are reminded that Jesus comes close to us, not always to magically and instantly take away our burdens to make us happy, but to take the yoke with us and bear our burdens, walk and pull the load with us in a way that is intimate and life-changing, no matter how happy or unhappy life's circumstances may seem on any given day or any given season. Come unto me, all you that travail and are heavy burdened, and I will refresh you and give you rest. That refreshment sometimes comes, and that encouragement sometimes comes still in the middle of bearing the burden, not throwing it off all at once. Yes, it is a season of risk, of frustration, of getting pulled in different directions as individuals, households, parish, and our nation. As Christians, though, we are called to find our peace and even our joy in the midst of unhappy circumstances, not because the yoke is taken off our shoulders, but because we know we do not have to bear it alone. And by bearing it with us, Jesus gives us rest and hope and the ability to continue on, still receiving his comfort and allowing ourselves to help comfort others, whether that is inside the walls of our own house, inside the boundaries of our own parish and our town, or all those whom we care for and encourage. The words are 2,000 years old and have encouraged Christians through dangers and trials of all sorts, and this one too. Come to me, all you who travail and are weary, and I will give you rest and refreshment. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light. Take comfort and strength in those words, even as our burdens may continue.